Good morning, everyone. This is Amber Bonilla from CDSS. I just wanted to thank everyone so much for joining us this morning and welcome you to part 5 of our ABAWD webinar training series. I'm the manager in our ABAWD policy unit here at the CalFresh Policy section, and I'm joined today, as always, by Sydney Stellinger and Danielle Watkins-McGee, who are also both policy analysts in the ABAWD policy unit. We're moving right along in our series. Last time we met, we discussed counting months of ABAWD participation, and today we'll be discussing regaining eligibility under the ABAWD time limit rule. If anyone has missed any of our previous webinars, not to worry, they were all recorded and we've linked them at the end of this presentation, and we'll also be sending out a follow-up email after this presentation with the PowerPoint slides and a link to the recording as well. So now for just a couple of logistics. As always, this webinar will be hosted in listen-only mode, and there's 2 ways to listen in, either via your computer or via phone. And information on how to connect is located on the right-hand side of your screen. And we've reserved some time at the end of the presentation for participants to ask questions. So if you'd like to submit a question, please do so at any time using the question box throughout the webinar. And I will be doing my best to answer questions as we go, but we will address as many as time permits at the end of the webinar as well. We'll also be keeping a record of all questions asked, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those as we can. So for those questions that we're unable to get to today during our presentation, we're keeping a running list, and we'll be releasing a Q&A at the end of our series. So also please note that this webinar will be recorded and available after the presentation along with the PowerPoint slides. As I mentioned, we are moving right along in our series. After today's webinar, there's 2 more left, one on the 15% exemption policy, and we'll be ending our series with a presentation on the ABAWD clock, reporting, and med. Each webinar in this series is really meant to provide our partners with a starting point in developing their understanding of the ABAWD time limit, as well as to aid in the development of your own training. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Danielle, who will be going over our agenda for today.
Good morning, everyone. So our agenda today is pretty full. We're going to start this morning with an overview of previous webinars as a level setting and reminder for those of you who have been watching this webinar since the beginning. We will review the ABAWD time limit, discuss how an ABAWD can regain eligibility, define 3 consecutive months, give an overview of county and community partner takeaways, and then have a question and answer period if time is permitting. So for those of you who have just joined us today or maybe missed one or more of the webinar trainings in our series, this will be a quick recap of the webinar series thus far to tie today's topic in with the broader discussions we've had over the last few months. We started with an ABAWD 101 presentation where we presented a high-level overview of the ABAWD policy and time-limited participation. We then took a deep dive into ABAWD exemptions and how some individuals who are considered ABAWDs may not be subject to the time limit if they meet certain exemption criteria. As we discussed, this is one of the most crucial steps in implementing the ABAWD time limit. We know from the experience of other states that roughly half to 2/3 of the ABAWD population is typically exempt from the time limit. In September, we discussed how those individuals who do not meet the criteria for an exemption can satisfy the ABAWD work requirement through employment or other qualifying activities. The main focus of this webinar was to understand that an ABAWD must be involved in a qualifying work activity for an average of 20 hours per week, totaling 80 hours per month, and that many work activities can be combined to satisfy the work requirement. Last month, we discussed counting months of ABAWD participation and touched on inter-county transfers as well as losing eligibility. Today, we will begin going over how an ABAWD can regain that eligibility. For review, ABAWD eligibility is limited to 3 full countable months of CalFresh benefits within a 36-month period, while not satisfying the ABAWD work requirement or otherwise exempt from the time limit. The ABAWD time limit applies to individuals that are between the ages of 18 and 49, have no dependents, and who do not qualify for an exemption. For those ABAWDs subject to the time limit, it is required that the ABAWD works or participates in a qualifying work activity for an average of 20 hours per week, or for a total of 80 hours monthly. We discussed countable months in depth during last month's webinar, but for review, a countable month is any month in which an ABAWD receives a full month of CalFresh benefits while not exempt from the ABAWD time limit, satisfying the work requirement, living in a waived area or county, or in receipt of the 15% exemption. As mentioned in the previous slide, ABAWDs are time limited to 3 countable months of full benefits in the 36-month period. So after an ABAWD subject to the time limit has exhausted their 3 countable months of benefits, they are no longer eligible for CalFresh unless they satisfy criteria to regain eligibility, which we will discuss in just a few minutes. When an ABAWD loses eligibility, the CWD must discontinue the ABAWD's CalFresh benefits with timely and adequate notice. For example, say we have Amy who is an ABAWD that has already used 2 countable months. She's currently satisfying the work requirement, but on the last day of the current month, she determines that she will not be able to satisfy the 80-hour work requirement. She has 10 days from the time it was known to the household to report this drop of hours to the CWD. On the 10th day, Amy did notify the county. The CWD now has 10 days from the day the ABAWD notified the county to send the notice of discontinuance. This notice must be sent no later than 10 days after the ABAWD reports their status. The current notice is the DFA 377.11, which is the notice of discontinuance for failure to satisfy the ABAWD work requirement. We will be releasing an updated version of the DFA 377.11, which contains updated language and information on the reason for the discontinuance, as well as ways in which the ABAWD may regain eligibility or meet exemption criteria. Once the ABAWD has been discontinued, they do remain ineligible to receive CalFresh benefits for the remainder of the 36-month period, unless certain criteria are met. Once an ABAWD has lost eligibility, they may regain their eligibility at any time by satisfying the work requirement for 30 consecutive days. Just for a further point of clarity, these are 30 consecutive calendar days and not necessarily a calendar month. The individual may also regain eligibility by qualifying for an exemption during any part of the month, by moving to a waived county or area, or by reaching the end of the 36-month period. There is no limit to the number of times an ABAWD may regain eligibility during the 36-month period, so long as they meet one of the criteria described above. Finally, a new application is required in order to regain eligibility for CalFresh. So once an ABAWD has exhausted their 3 countable months and has been discontinued, they must meet the criteria for regaining eligibility prior to submitting a new application. Along with the new application, the client must submit proof of hours worked if they are regaining eligibility through employment or any other qualifying work activity. Prospective work hours do not qualify an individual to regain eligibility. They must have already satisfied the work requirement for a period of 30 consecutive days. Once the individual has satisfied the work requirement for 36 consecutive days and submitted that verification, they will again be eligible for CalFresh and will be assigned a new certification period. The certification period is separate from the 36-month period or the fixed statewide clock. As a reminder, the individual's 3 countable months do not start over, and the ABAWD must continue to satisfy the work requirement, qualify for an exemption, or live in a waived area for the remainder of the 36-month period in order to continue receiving CalFresh benefits. Next, we will be discussing each criteria for regaining eligibility in a little more detail. The first way an ABAWD may regain CalFresh eligibility after being discontinued is by satisfying the ABAWD work requirement. As mentioned in the last slide, the ABAWD must satisfy the work requirement for a period of 30 consecutive days, not necessarily a calendar month. This must be done prior to application. An ABAWD can satisfy the work requirement through employment, which can include paid employment, self-employment, and in-kind work, or work in exchange for goods and services, or by participating in a qualifying work activity, which includes community service or volunteer work, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act programs, or a combination of the employment and any other qualifying work activity. Remember that workfare cannot be combined with other methods for satisfying the work requirement. Verification is required at the time of application, and again, prospective work hours will not qualify the individual to regain eligibility. So for another example, we have Lucas, who applied for CalFresh benefits and was determined to be an ABAWD. When he originally applied for CalFresh, he was satisfying the work requirement by working 80 hours per month at a manufacturing plant. During the slow season, the plant laid Lucas off. Lucas called the CWD. Within 10 days of the date the drop-in work hours became known to the household, and he started using his countable months. After using his 3 countable months, the CWD discontinued Lucas from receiving CalFresh benefits. Later on, within the same 36-month period, Lucas was rehired by the manufacturing plant. After working 80 hours within a 30 consecutive day period, Lucas reapplied for CalFresh. He was able to successfully regain his CalFresh eligibility because he did in fact satisfy the work requirement according to the guidelines that were required for reapplication. Another way an ABAWD can qualify to regain eligibility is if they have met or if they meet the criteria for an exemption during any part of the month. The ABAWD exemption criteria are shown in this graphic and include an individual who is under the age 18 or over age 49, residing in a CalFresh household with a member under the age of 18, pregnant, exempt from CalFresh work registration, or physically or mentally unfit to work. For a more in-depth explanation of ABAWD exemptions, you can refer to Part 2 of this training series. For this criteria in particular, client education is really critical. ABAWD clients need to understand the various ways they may be able to regain CalFresh eligibility through exemption criteria. When an ABAWD reapplies for CalFresh, the CWD should reassess the ABAWD for any of the qualifying exemptions. So for example, we are presented with Mason, who has already been identified as an ABAWD. When he originally applied for CalFresh, the eligibility worker determined that he did not qualify for any exemption and was subject to the time limit. This means that he was required to satisfy the work requirement in order to receive CalFresh benefits or use a countable month. He eventually uses his 3 countable months and was discontinued from CalFresh. After being discontinued, Mason started to receive disability benefits. He reapplied for CalFresh benefits, and it was determined that he was an exempt ABAWD and was eligible to once again receive CalFresh benefits. The next way an ABAWD may regain eligibility is by moving to a waived area. This population may be transient and thus may move frequently between counties. Once an ABAWD resides in a waived county, they are no longer subject to the time limit and do not need to satisfy the work requirement. Currently, the entire state is under a statewide waiver until September 1st, 2018. On September 1st, 2018, some counties will lose their ABAWD time limit waiver and will have to implement the time limit. At this time, CDSS does not know which counties will lose their waivers. When an ABAWD moves to an area that is waived, the ABAWD is no longer subject to the time limit. The individual does not need to satisfy the work requirement or verify exemption eligibility. If the individual was previously disqualified for exhausting their 3 countable months, the disqualification must be lifted and they may again receive CalFresh benefits if they are otherwise eligible. ABAWDs must still be tracked when moving to a waived area, and as always, they must still submit a new application to reapply for benefits in the new county. The final way an ABAWD may regain eligibility for CalFresh benefits is by reaching the end of the 36-month period. When the fixed statewide clock ends, a new clock will begin the following day. Our current fixed statewide clock began on January 1, 2017, and it will reset on January 1, 2020. Once a new clock begins, ABAWD eligibility is restored. They are once again eligible to receive CalFresh benefits. Because of this reset, they are now eligible for 3 new countable months, and they are potentially eligible for another 3 consecutive months of benefits.
All right, good morning, everyone. To review up to this point, an ABAWD can regain eligibility multiple ways. This can be by satisfying the work requirement, qualifying for an exemption, moving to a waived area, or reaching the end of the 36-month period. There is no limit to the number of times an ABAWD individual can regain eligibility during the 36-month period, as long as they satisfy the criteria for regaining eligibility. However, it is important to note that although the client may regain eligibility multiple times, they are only eligible to receive their 3 countable months and their 3 consecutive months once within a 36-month period. Clients must reapply for CalFresh benefits every time they are discontinued. And the certification period, which is separate from the 36-month period, must start over when the ABAWD individual reapplies and qualifies to regain eligibility for CalFresh. When the ABAWD individual reapplies for CalFresh benefits after being discontinued for exhausting their 3 countable months and not satisfying the work requirement, the CWG must verify that the applicant has satisfied the criteria for regaining eligibility. This includes rescreening the applicant for an exemption which could allow them to receive CalFresh benefits for a longer period of time, verifying that the ABAWD satisfied the work requirement for 80 hours within a consecutive 30-day period, determining if the ABAWD resides in a waived area and or if the client does in fact qualify to receive CalFresh benefits, or just determining if the ABAWD resides in a waived area. If the client does in fact qualify to receive CalFresh benefits, for a household of 1, if the ABAWD regains eligibility for CalFresh, benefits must be prorated from the date of application. For existing households, if an ABAWD is requesting their CalFresh benefits be reinstated on an existing case, the CWD must follow current policy and add the household member. The CWD shall take action to add the ABAWD individual effective the first day of the month following the month in which the request for CalFresh benefits was made, after all verification has been provided. Now we're going to spend some time discussing an additional 3-month period of eligibility that is available to ABAWD to meet certain criteria. This additional 3-month period is referred to as the 3 consecutive months. There is a provision of the ABAWD time limit rule that allows certain ABAWDs to be granted an additional 3 consecutive months of eligibility after they have exhausted their 3 countable months. This additional eligibility is granted in very limited circumstances. The ABAWD individual must have exhausted their 3 countable months and must have been discontinued from CalFresh. They then must have satisfied criteria for regaining eligibility by satisfying the work requirement and then, for whatever reason, subsequently stop satisfying the work requirement once again. Per FNS Administrative Notice 1604, only ABAWDs that regain eligibility by working or participating in a qualifying work activity are entitled to an additional set of 3 consecutive months. We'll be going through an example in just a few minutes to clarify this policy. Finally, this additional 3 consecutive months of benefits is available only once during the 36-month period, and as the name suggests, these 3 additional consecutive months of benefits must be used consecutively. They cannot be used individually even if the ABAWD begins satisfying the work requirement within these 3 consecutive months. Once the ABAWD has lost eligibility for the second time, they will automatically be assigned their 3 consecutive months. They cannot be saved or held for a later date. They will begin their first month of their 3 consecutive months following the date the individual notifies the CWD that they are no longer satisfying the work requirement. If satisfying the work requirement through workfare or any other county-administered program, the 3 consecutive months will begin the first month following the date the CWD notifies the individual that they are no longer satisfying the work requirement. These 3 consecutive months can be applied retroactively in the event that the client does not report their status after their CalFresh benefits were issued for the month. The 3 consecutive months have to be taken in order and used together, no matter what. For an example, if an ABAWD regains eligibility at the end of month 2 of their 3 consecutive months, they do not get their 3rd consecutive month back. The 3 consecutive months, like their counterparts, the countable months, only happen once within a 36-month period. The ABAWD can regain eligibility multiple times, but only receives the 3 consecutive months the second time they lose eligibility. We will now go over a couple of examples that will help you understand who is eligible to receive 3 consecutive months. The first example involves an ABAWD who uses their 3 countable months and is discontinued. Are they eligible to receive their 3 consecutive months? No, they are not eligible to receive their 3 consecutive months because they only lost eligibility once and have not yet regained eligibility for the second time. The second example involves an ABAWD that lost eligibility for the second time after satisfying the work requirement for 30 consecutive days. Are they eligible to receive their 3 consecutive months? Yes, they are eligible to receive their 3 consecutive months because they lost eligibility, regained eligibility by satisfying the work requirement for 30 consecutive days, and then lost eligibility once again. In this slide, we will be walking through an example of both regaining eligibility and the 3 consecutive month policy. These slides present a visual representation of the 36-month calendar. Each month in a 36-month period requires a code which represents the ABAWD participation status in that particular month. You can see some of the common tracking code and explanations located underneath the calendar. Remember to please follow along from left to right and top to bottom. In this example, we have a client named Sophia. Sophia applied for benefits in September of 2018 and was determined to be an ABAWD at application. She applied after the 1st of September and was given a prorated or partial month of benefit allotment for the month as indicated by tracking code P. Partial month benefits are not countable. At application, it was determined that Sophia did not meet the criteria for an exemption and was currently satisfying the work requirement. She satisfied the work requirement from October until November of 2018, when her employment ended. She was well informed by her county of her responsibility to report a drop in work hours, so she let her worker know that her work hours dropped. Within 10 days, the eligibility became known to the household. She then used her countable months in January, February, and March of 2019, and was then discontinued in April. She found another job and satisfied the work requirement for a period of 30 days before reapplying for CalFresh benefits in June of 2019. She again applied and after the first and received a partial month of benefits, which is also not a countable month. She satisfied the work requirement in June and July and August in 2019 when her employment ended. Because she had regained eligibility by satisfying the work requirement and then subsequently stopped satisfying the work requirement, she was eligible for and automatically assigned her 3 additional consecutive months of CalFresh benefits, and these are indicated here by the tracking code C. As you can see, she used all of her 3 countable months. She lost eligibility. She then regained eligibility by satisfying the work requirement, and she then lost eligibility for the second time and was issued her 3 consecutive months. This calendar is another visual representation of the use of the 3 consecutive month policy. You should follow along the same way you did in the previous example. Notice that in this example, the 36-month clock has been reset and runs from January 2020 to December 2022. In this example, we have a client named Ava. She applied for CalFresh benefits in January of 2020 and was determined to be an ABAWD at application. She applied after the 1st of January and was given a prorated or partial month of benefit allotment for that month, as indicated by the tracking code P. Partial months are not countable. At application, it was determined that Ava did not meet the criteria for an exemption and was not satisfying the work requirement. She used her 3 countable months in February, March, and April of 2020. This is indicated by tracking code N. She was ineligible to receive CalFresh benefits because she wasn't satisfying the work requirement and did not meet any exemptions from May through July of 2020. This was her first time losing eligibility, and this is indicated by tracking code 9. She reapplied for CalFresh benefits in August of 2020 because she began satisfying the work requirement. Because when she reapplied, she only received a partial month of benefits, which is indicated here by tracking code P and is not a countable month. She continued to satisfy the work requirement, which is represented by tracking code W, through February of 2021. After reporting that she was no longer satisfying the work requirement to the CWD, she lost eligibility for the second time. Because she had regained eligibility by satisfying the work requirement for 30 consecutive days and then subsequently stopped satisfying the work requirement, she was eligible for and automatically assigned her 3 countable months. 3 consecutive months, consecutive months of CalFresh benefits, which are indicated here by the tracking code C. As you can see, she used all of her countable months. She then lost eligibility and regained eligibility by satisfying the work requirement lost eligibility for the second time, and was then issued for 3 consecutive months. To review, we understand that the 3 consecutive months policy is complicated and can be difficult to understand. So here's a quick review. The 3 consecutive months must be used together. The 3 consecutive months can only be used once within a 36-month period. The 3 consecutive months cannot be used until all 3 countable months have been exhausted. The 3 consecutive months can only be used after an ABAWD loses eligibility for a second time. Remember, the individual must have regained eligibility by satisfying the work requirement for 30 consecutive days. Another way to look at this is to remember that an ABAWD must first lose eligibility and then regain eligibility by satisfying the work requirement, lose eligibility again, and then they are eligible to receive their 3 consecutive months. Before we go to our questions, we'd like to end with some key takeaways for our CWDs and our county partners. Is how can the CWD leverage qualifying employment and training programs, volunteer opportunities, and workfare programs? How can the CWD best prepare for the administrative challenges associated with ABAWD regaining eligibility and tracking their 3 consecutive months? And what are some best practices in your county or organization regarding ABAWD engagement? At this time, we'd like to open the floor for some questions. As a reminder, please submit your questions in the question box. We will be keeping a record of those questions that we cannot get to with follow-up responses.
Thanks, Sydney. So this is Amber again, and I'm looking through the questions, and there actually haven't been very many submitted. So I'll take that as this was very clear and easy to understand. So I'll go through the few that have been submitted. Please, if you have questions, take time to enter them in the box, and we'll go ahead and answer them as best we can. So our first question this morning, one second, is a question about moving to a waived county as a way of regaining eligibility. So the question is, can an individual request an inter-county transfer or an ICT when they move as opposed to having to reapply?
So in this current case, they would have to reapply because we're talking about ABAWDs that have already been discontinued and they've already lost eligibility, and at this point they're regaining eligibility. However, if the ABAWD has not lost eligibility, they can request an ICT and transfer to any county they would like, waived or non-waived.
Thank you. A couple of questions have come in to ask if we can send a narrative along with the examples that Sydney went over, and I just want to let everyone know that absolutely, yes, we can. The slide that you were sent is the PowerPoint version, so you should be able to click through and have all the animations appear, but in the version we send out this afternoon, we can add in the narrative there. Let me continue filtering through these questions. So one question is asking, is the client actually receiving 6 months of CalFresh if they receive 3 countable and 3 consecutive months in a 36-month period?
So yes, they technically are receiving a total of 6 months of CalFresh benefits.
Yes. And then just as a reminder, they do have to meet that additional eligibility criteria for the 3 consecutive months. So every ABAWD, excuse me, is guaranteed to be granted 3 countable months during the 36-month period, but they do have to meet that additional eligibility criteria to receive the additional 3 consecutive months. Okay. One second as we filter through. I see lots of questions popping in. Okay, this next one is asking, can we use prospective hours to regain eligibility? So I'm thinking the question is, if a client has let you know that they will meet the 80 hours within a 30 consecutive day period, is that enough to allow them to regain eligibility and qualify them again for CalFresh?
No. To regain eligibility, the ABAWD actually must have already worked the 80 hours within a 30-day period. So unfortunately, we can't use hours that they might work. We need the actual proof that says that they've actually qualified to meet and regain eligibility.
Great, thank you. So this next question is on exemption criteria. So while an ABAWD individual is receiving their 3 consecutive months while they're within that 3-month period, what happens if the client meets an exemption?
As we're talking about the 3 consecutive months, no matter what, if they've already started using the 3 consecutive months, that they will receive all 3 and they can't have that changed. However, if it was determined that the exemption would qualify them during the first consecutive month and they would not need to use any of the 3, then it can be retroactively changed to an exemption as long as it's not in month 2 or 3 of the consecutive months. It has to be in the first month.
Thank you. Still reading through, lots of questions coming in. Okay. So this next one is another question around an exemption. So the question is, if an ABAWD loses eligibility after using their 3rd countable month, they reapply and then the client, let's say, becomes pregnant or qualifies for some other exemption criteria, does that automatically make her eligible?
So the pregnancy will give her an exemption from the time limit, so she no longer needs to satisfy the work requirements. However, she does not qualify for the 3 consecutive months because she did not regain eligibility by satisfying the work requirements.
Great, thank you. Okay, here's another one that asks, if a client works 80 hours in only 2 weeks, can they reapply or do they have to wait 30 days?
So yes, they can, because it's just 30 consecutive days and not within a 30-day period. So if they were to work 80 hours in 2 weeks, they could in theory use the 2 weeks before and make that a full month, but as long as they've done 80 hours within 30 days, they do qualify to regain eligibility.
Yeah, and just to clarify, if they've worked those 80 hours, even if it's within 2 weeks, they would have satisfied the work requirement for that month, which is the criteria, one of the criteria to regain.
If it's easier, you can think of the 30 consecutive days as like a limit. They have to satisfy the 80-hour requirement within those 30 consecutive days. That's like their maximum time frame that they have to satisfy the work requirement. There is no minimum.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Jen. Okay, so this next question is asking, let's say an ABAWD they've satisfied criteria for regaining, so they've reapplied and they are certified for 12 months. Let's say they've used their 3 countable months already, we know because they regained, and they have satisfied the work requirement for 8 of the 12 months, but they are no longer complying. So would we apply the 3 consecutive months even if it goes beyond their certification period?
Yes. It doesn't matter if the certification period ends early. You would still code C for the 3 consecutive months. As long as their first consecutive month is given within a month that they are certified to receive benefits, the second and third months are added consecutively.
Great, thank you. Okay. Apologies for the delay. A lot of these questions are really long, so we're trying to read through them to make sure we capture what is being asked. So thank you for your patience in advance. Here's a question about if, asking, can the 3 consecutive months be applied retroactively, and when would something like that occur?
So they can be applied retroactively. Let me think of a scenario really quickly.
We did mention it in one of the examples early in the presentation, how if for some reason you determine that a client would have been eligible to receive the 3 consecutive months, let's say they may have missed a required report or something along those lines, it is possible to go back. Let's say you find out at their STAR 7 that they actually, after they had regained, they stopped working but maybe missed a required report. You could go back and apply those consecutive months to months where they may have received benefits in error. And we can, we'll also take some time. A lot of the questions coming in are very long and have multiple questions. So we'll definitely just want to flag that we'll take some time to review these questions and add them to our Q&A to make sure to give clear and thorough answers. So just wanted to let folks know that all of these questions will be addressed, especially these ones that have multiple parts. Okay, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. This question is asking, and I'm going to try to interpret, it asks, will clients be required to submit 6 months worth of income at every STAR 7 to see if they met requirements or not? And I think what this person is asking, the answer is no, they won't be required to submit 6 months worth of income. And I think what this question is getting at is, are we going to be verifying that the ABAWD actually did satisfy the work requirement each month? And the answer to that as well is no. The responsibility to report work hours or a drop in work hours, however, is on the client. And we are a simplified reporting system, so they are only required to let us know that they've had a drop in work hours. So at STAR 7, they just need to submit information for the data month, just like all clients. And we're not checking monthly participation. So hopefully that answered that question. If not, please let me know, the person that asked, and we can provide another response.
That's also a good way to retroactively apply the consecutive months. If the client did not report that they had a drop in work hours and they were just issued benefits with the CWD under the impression that they were satisfying the work requirement, applying the 3 consecutive months, as long as they met the criteria, can avoid having to issue an OI for those months of benefits received.
Okay. And this one, we've kind of already addressed, but it was asked again, so we'll respond again. The question is, why does a client have to reapply when moving from county to county?
Right. So the client, in this case, has already lost eligibility. They can apply in any county, but in this example, I'm guessing the ABAWD moved to a waived county and is no longer subject to the time limit, which means they're now eligible to reapply and regain eligibility in that waiver county or area. But in the examples that we're using today, they have already lost eligibility, which is why they have to reapply instead of doing an ITT.
Thank you. And then another question came in asking, are we using the word household and assistance unit interchangeably, or are they supposed to be different? And they are different, and assistance unit really only applies to CalWORKs. So for CalFresh, we're using the term household. Alrighty, so for the sake of time, I'm going to move us forward. As I mentioned, a lot of the questions coming in are very long and have multiple parts. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we will definitely be responding to them in our Q&A. And if you have additional questions that you would like answered, please email myself, Danielle, or Sydney. We'd be happy to assist you with that. And just a quick review again of our upcoming webinars. Next month, we'll be going through 15% exemption policy and then wrapping up our series in January on the ABAWD clock, reporting, and meds. So on this resources page, we've changed it a little this time. We have linked here for you all of the ABAWD webinar training series recordings and PowerPoints are linked on our CalFresh webpage. So, the links are provided here for you, and we'll also send out an updated one this afternoon that includes this presentation. We've also linked the USDA FNS ABAWD page and ACL 1624. So with that, just wanted to thank everyone again so much for your participation this morning and attending our presentation, and we look forward to seeing you next month. So thank you.